Sometimes the people we underestimate the most carry the biggest truths. She was just a teenager, standing on the sidewalk with nothing but truth in her voice. Yet to the officer in front of her words sounded like a joke. He smirked, dismissing her, laughing at the very idea that her mother could serve in the nation's most elite military force. To him, she was just another black girl making wild claims. But what he didn't know, what no one saw coming, was that the truth was about to walk right through that door. And when it did, the smirk would vanish. Because some moments leave you speechless. This was one of them. Her name was Maya, a quiet yet determined teenager growing up in a small suburban neighborhood. Life for her wasn't easy, but she carried herself with a kind of strength that came from her mother's example. Her mom was away often, working long hours, and most neighbors whispered their own assumptions about what she did for a living. Maya never felt the need to explain until one afternoon when a routine walk home turned into something far different. The day began like any other. The sun dipped low, painting the streets in shades of orange, and Maya clutched her backpack as she made her way past the corner store. That's when the patrol car slowed beside her. A window rolled down. The officer inside wore a casual smirk, the kind that already held judgment. At first it seemed harmless, but soon the questions began, sharp, dismissive, laced with disbelief. He wanted to know where she was going, who she belonged to, and why she walked alone. Maya, steady in her voice, mentioned her mom. She told him her mother was serving in the U.S. Special Forces. But instead of respect, the officer's reaction was a chuckle, like her words couldn't possibly be true. To him, the idea didn't fit the picture he had already painted of her. That moment, the smirk, the laugh, the disbelief, was the spark. Maya's ordinary walk home had now shifted into something heavier, something that would challenge not just her dignity, but her mother's as well. And the truth was only steps away from being revealed. The laugh didn't fade quickly. It lingered in the air, sharp and humiliating, as if the officer wanted her to feel small. Maya's cheeks warmed, not with shame, but with anger. She knew her mother's truth, yet in this moment, that truth was being mocked by someone who carried authority, someone who should have known better. The officer stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt with a casual arrogance. Special Forces? His tone was coated with disbelief, a word stretched into mockery. He scanned Maya from head to toe, as if looking for cracks in her story. To him, a black teen in simple clothes couldn't possibly be connected to something so elite, so honorable. Passers-by began to notice. A few slowed their pace, curious but unwilling to intervene. Maya stood still, her backpack hanging loosely on her shoulder. The officer pressed on, tossing out questions that weren't really questions. They were challenges, thinly veiled ways of saying, "You don't belong to that world, don't pretend you do." Inside, Maya's chest tightened. She thought about her mother, about the early mornings when she left in uniform, the quiet discipline that shaped their home, the pride she carried without boasting. None of it was a fantasy. None of it deserved to be laughed at. Yet here she was, forced into a corner by someone who thought authority gave him the right to strip away her truth. Minutes stretched. The officer circled his patrol car as if weighing whether to push the situation further. His smirk remained, but underneath it was a sharper edge. A disbelief hardened into judgment. "Special Forces," he muttered again, shaking his head, as if repeating the words could erase them from being true. Maya's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. She knew silence could be mistaken for weakness, yet words felt useless against his laughter. Instead, she held her ground, her stance becoming its own quiet defiance. The tension thickened with each passing second, the street around them holding its breath. And then came the sound. The firm, deliberate footsteps approaching from behind. Heavy, confident, impossible to ignore. The kind of footsteps that made people turn before they even saw who it was. Maya's heart leapt, not from fear, but from recognition. She didn't need to look back to know who it was. The truth the officer mocked was walking closer, and soon his smirk would face the weight of reality he never expected. The footsteps grew louder, steady and commanding, until the officer finally turned his head. His smirk faltered. A woman in uniform stepped into view, her posture straight, her gaze unflinching. The patches on her sleeves and the weight of her presence spoke louder than words ever could. This wasn't just any uniform, it was Special Forces. The street seemed to fall silent. Even those who had stopped to watch now stood frozen, their eyes darting between the officer and the woman who carried herself with unmistakable authority. Maya's heart surged with pride, relief washing over her. Her truth had arrived, undeniable and unshakable. The officer's confidence cracked. He shifted on his feet, his earlier arrogance draining as reality settled in. This was the very person he had laughed at, a mother who had served her country at the highest level, who had walked into situations far more dangerous than this quiet street. His mockery now looked small, pathetic against the weight of her presence. Her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time he had no words. The laugh that had once echoed in the air was gone, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against his chest. Authority recognized authority, and in this moment, his badge and uniform seemed paper-thin compared to hers. Maya stood a little taller, her chin lifting as if her mother's strength had passed into her. The moment wasn't just about proving the truth. It was about exposing the ugly assumptions that had fueled the laughter. The officer swallowed hard, his face pale, his stance stiff. He had mocked what he didn't understand, dismissed what he refused to believe. And now, in front of everyone, his disbelief had been shattered. Because sometimes reality arrives in a uniform you can't deny. For Maya, the moment felt like justice unfolding in real time. Her mother stood not just as proof of her words, but as a living reminder of resilience, discipline, and sacrifice. The silence on that street spoke louder than any argument could. What began as ridicule had ended in undeniable truth. And for once, the laughter wasn't at her expense. The officer, stripped of his smugness, could only step back. He had mocked a child for the color of her skin, assumed weakness where there was strength, and dismissed her story before it was even told. Now, in the shadow of the woman before him, those assumptions looked small, fragile, and dangerous. Maya didn't need to say anything more. Her mother's presence carried the weight of every unspoken word. It was a quiet victory, but it meant everything. Not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or ridiculed for simply being who they were. As the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers replaced laughter. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others in shame. The truth had walked onto the scene, and it had changed everything. But beyond this single street, the story echoed. Because this wasn't just about one girl, one officer, or one mother in uniform. It was about the reality that far too often, people are judged not by their character, but by assumptions tied to race, class, or background. And those assumptions, left unchecked, can humiliate, wound, or even destroy. Maya's story reminds us of something simple but powerful. Never underestimate someone's truth. Behind every face is a history, a struggle, a strength we may not see. The question is, how many more stories like hers will it take before judgment is replaced with respect?